You're a boy, right?
No, I'm a girl.
Who told you you're a girl?
Mommy.
I'm here today with Jeff Younger, and some of you may have heard about his case. It's one of those cases that got a lot of us involved and even more committed to stopping medically transitioning children. Jeff's son was being told by his mother that he was a girl, and Jeff has been fighting hard to get full custody of his twin boys, one of whom his mom claims is transgender and the other isn't. And so, Jeff, why don't you just tell us about your case? Because it's so compelling, and on so many levels, it's scary and shocking and horrifying, and it sort of encapsulates sort of the worst that the trans activist movement can produce.
Yeah, I think it does. And I'll just start by saying that the reason I think the trans community has really latched onto my case as kind of a linchpin case and has really helped my ex-wife is my son presents as a boy with everyone except his mother. And I think they have this idea that if they can get this boy, they can get any boy that they want. So here's kind of how it started with me. I had conflicts with my stepdaughters, which is pretty normal. And my ex-wife never really quite came out, I think, really just never really came out of a postpartum depression. Mm-hmm. And during that whole thing, she decided that she wanted to file for divorce. So she used her daughters. When I knew that she was going to file for divorce, I was in the house and I was in the office, and they thought I was in the backyard working. And she was instructing them what to tell psychologists to get them to push me out of the house because I was bad for the stepdaughters. So that's when I knew that something was going to happen. And then sure enough, that's exactly the route she chose. She's a pediatrician, so she knows how to manipulate the perceptions of care providers. And she's, she has a credibility with them that you wouldn't have if you weren't a doctor. And this is a very strange thing too, because psychologists are very well aware that there are higher incidents of child abuse, medical child abuse, and mental illness and drug abuse among doctors. It's much higher than the general population. They should actually trust doctors less, but they don't. They can't overcome the proximity bias and the professional relationships that they have. So anyway, I moved out of the house. I moved about a mile up the road. We had 50-50. We shared the kids during the 2 years leading up to trial, right? That's how long it took us to get to a divorce trial.
And just to clarify for people who aren't familiar with this case, you have twin boys.
Twin boys, yes, James and June. So my 3-year-old son came to me in my new place, which I had probably been there maybe 3 months, and said he was wearing like a dishcloth on his head. And I said, "Why are you wearing that dishcloth?" I expected, we had watched Lawrence of Arabia, so I expected something like that. And he said, "Well, I'm a girl." And there's a video out on YouTube, you can go see it. And that's you're with me when you watch that video, finding out for the very first time.
3 years old.
3 years old. He had just turned 3. He was less than a month after his 3rd birthday. And he says, "Mommy says I'm a girl." And he starts telling me all these things Mommy says about him. And what I think really happened was she was looking for a way to alienate me from my children in a way that she knew from a religious standpoint, from just my beliefs about protecting children and other things that I could never condone. And this became the wedge that she has used throughout this divorce to try to split me from my children. She began to cross-dress him, then she started putting him in public. I was going to St. John the Baptist Greek Orthodox Church in Euless, Texas. It's run by a priest named Father Vasile. And she brought my son in a dress as a girl named Luna to the Greek festival and actually put him on stage and made him dance around like a girl. And just to tell you what's going on with the churches, I pointed this out to my priest. I said, "This is completely doctrinally incorrect. This can't be allowed." And he just said, "What can I do?" and walked away from me. Many people at the church took her side, and eventually I had to leave the church because of all this stuff. They were not supporting my son and were actively working against him. In fact, his godmother, who is a lawyer with HUD, every time I would explain to her kind of like what was going on with James, she would deliver all that information to Anne so she could give it to her lawyers. So the church was actively undermining my case. One of the central claims in the case I've had is that, she's been indoctrinating him and forcing him to do this. There were 5 women at the church who witnessed at his 5th birthday, which was like her coming out party for James, where she made him wear a dress, and he hid in a corner and under a table crying because he didn't want to come out in a dress. And these 5 women refused to testify. One of them told me that they would absolutely lie if I subpoenaed them. So the church completely turned against my son, totally. So one of the lessons I learned there, you cannot depend on the churches anymore.
Which is just on so many levels sad and shocking and disheartening. And, there are going to be people who watch this who aren't Christian. And then there are going to be some people who are Christian and who are supportive of this transgender movement. But from my position as someone who is very liberal and recently became a Christian, there's no way that a religion should approve of the concept that a child can be born in the wrong body.
Nope. There's simply no theological basis for that belief. And I'm Orthodox, so we both believe in the Bible and tradition, and it's against both.
And it's also not scientific.
It's not scientific at all. No.
And it's also really harmful for a child to be taught that there's something inherently wrong with them, something so wrong with them that it's their body that's wrong. That's just, I can't imagine how anybody in your church, how your wife could ever, if she wanted to hurt you, she sure figured out a way to do it.
She did. She's very skilled at that. She's incredibly skilled at it. Well, what it comes down to is, for the left, their leftist presuppositions trump all theological concepts, all dogmas, all pronouncements in the Bible. That's just more important. One of the things that Orthodoxy recognized a long time ago, and I'm talking about like in the 300s, 300 AD, they recognized that that Scripture requires an interpretive apparatus, that it can be interpreted in so many different ways and really misinterpreted in so many different ways. And what this interpretive apparatus that Orthodoxy refers to is what it calls tradition. Tradition is just the way we interpret Scripture. And they're perfectly willing to substitute a modern interpretive apparatus to get their way. Now, my bishop did require every priest, and he's requiring this every year now, I think, to preach sermons, one, explaining the dogmas against abortion, the dogmas against transgenderism, and the dogmas against gay marriage. And these have been very controversial. The big donors at my church, at St. John the Baptist, were haranguing the priest, yelling at the priest over the speeches against abortion, for example. So they're perfectly willing to elevate, the left is perfectly willing to elevate their interpretive mechanism above the historical and traditional way we've interpreted Scripture. That was my lesson there. That's one of the big lessons. And it was one of the hardest lessons. I really felt betrayed, and I continue to feel that way.
Yeah, I can imagine. So how did your kids, I'm trying to imagine, as these are really, really little kids, and Jude is being told his brother's a girl now, which has got to be incredibly confusing. Like, why is his brother a girl and he's not?
Yep.
And why is it that, so how did you navigate that?
Well, for a long period of time, and I'm talking 2 years before this last show, we've had 3 trials now. Okay. So we had the divorce trial. Well, really 2 trials, but a lot of hearings, big hearings. So we had a divorce trial and then a motion to modify that she brought, where she wanted to take away all my parental rights. So
because you were admitting that your son was a son.
Yeah, oh yes. She accused me of child abuse in her
grounds
pleading.
that you weren't affirming.
That's right. And she subpoenaed my employers, sending letters, saying that I was accused of child abuse in a civil case and get me fired from my job. And she subpoenas every employer and every place I do an application, everybody I get a business card from, networking. She's trying to put me out of work using this technique.
It's unbelievable to
Yeah.
me that anybody would consider interacting with your child as their biological sex
Mhm.
as being child abuse. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
to me,
And
that's
they had no trouble getting experts to say that. I'll tell you how I had to counter it, but you asked me how I dealt with it. For most of the time, I was under a gag order. If you can believe this, in family courts just do all kinds of unconstitutional things all the time. So the court put me under an order which said I was not allowed to try to convince my son that he was a boy. So these are temporary orders, which are not appealable. There's very little recourse.
so. What does that involve? Does that mean, like, if you acknowledged that his reproductive organ was a penis, would that be in violation of that order? Like, how far did that order go?
Well, we never got to the enforcement stage because I kind of tiptoed around it as we went to trial. But I think that they intended it to be truly all-encompassing. And to this point where, I had my boys down by the creek, and I was teaching them how to trap rabbits. And we were just dirty. We were full of mud. And we came back. We got in the shower. And Jude just looks up at me. Jude is very sincere and almost literal in his interpretation of the world. And he just looked down, he pointed at James and said, "He has a penis. How can he be a girl?" And Jude and I have a lot in common. So I just said, "Well, Jude, I'm under a court order. I can't explain that to you. But every single night when you're with me, I read you the first book of Genesis up to the creation of man and woman."
This just makes me so sad, Jeff. I'm going to cry.
They literally did
can't
not let me
imagine
do
how
it.
the courts can order you
I know.
to deny something so basic as your child's biology.
You're correct. Not only that, they barred me from presenting him as a boy to anyone who knew him as a girl.
And he is so young. He's so young.
And this happened. We'd be out at a park, and somebody who knew him as a girl would be there. We had to flee because I could be arrested for
You get in
contempt.
trouble.
Yeah, I could go to jail for contempt. They made it absolutely clear they were willing to throw me in jail for that.
How do they have the authority to do this? I mean,
They don't have the authority.
What on earth law are you breaking by talking to your son as he is a son? What law is that?
Family, unfortunately, we get into this new area, beyond the transgender world, into the world of family courts. And I can explain to you why the transgender community has won most of its ground against conservatives in family court. So the family courts don't follow the law. In fact, if you go to judges' conferences for family court judges, which anybody can attend, you'll hear them bragging about that. They'll just say, "We don't follow the law. We follow the best interests of the child doctrine." So,
according to whom?
According to the judge. The judges essentially substitute their view of what is good for your child for what is yours. And that's what divorce actually means these days. It means the state takes control of raising your children. So the way it works in family court is they always use this pretext of protecting the child. And that on that basis, most states just give family courts almost unlimited play to do whatever they want. So I've been under all kinds of prior restraints of speech. I mean, consider that one speech restriction about telling my son that he's a boy. One, it's a prior restraint of speech, which we know is completely illegal in the United States. We can have no prior restraints of speech at all unless it's going to incite mayhem or violence. And even then, it has to pass a strict scrutiny due process test. Courts can't just determine that in an easy way, right? There has to be an actual formal hearing with all the due process stuff. So it was a prior restraint of speech. It was a violation of my religious liberties and my right to instruct my son in my religion and to raise him in my religion. It was a violation of the traditions and customs of the state of Texas. Down here, we don't dress boys like girls. And those traditions and customs under our state constitution have the effect of law here. right? So there's a whole host of things that that these courts do. And there's a really important point here that I think has been missed by a lot of people who oppose this transgender tyranny, what I call transgender child abuse. So there are two ways laws are made. I didn't know this till I got involved. There are two ways to make laws. One way is to write a statute, have a governor sign it or a president sign it, right? But there's also judge-made law, and we call it precedent under the English system, right? So here's what happens. I'm going to show you how the left has been very clever in how they've approached these issues. So in 2015 and 2016, there was a massive there was actually what amounts to a riot at an American Psychological Association meeting in 2016. They changed that definition from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. And the distinction means under gender identity disorder, the issue lies with the person's self-perception. Under gender dysphoria, it's a reaction to the culture's rejection of their self-identity. So that's why they made it.
Which is a huge, it's a huge
huge
difference.
shift.
Yeah, because I was.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was a child who had gender identity disorder. My disorder was in me, and I have no shame about saying that that was something that was wrong with my thinking, that I was, that there was a problem there. But now they're saying that the children who are identifying as transgender, that that's a normal developmental path, and the anxiety or discomfort that they have is because society hasn't completely embraced them in their gender identity.
That's right.
And that is shocking to me.
It's completely wrong too. I mean, we know it's wrong. I mean, this is one of the reasons they put these kids on puberty blockers, right? Because puberty is the cure for gender identity disorder. The cure is puberty. That's when you come to identify with your sex. We have a known thing here in Texas, the tomboy, right? And tomboys are girls who like to run with the guys. They hunt, ride, and shoot with all the boys. And, the boys tolerate them. They tolerate them because they don't cause a lot of trouble like some other girls might do in their company, in their male environment. And then, after they go through puberty, they get older, they begin to identify more as a woman. And in Texas, it's like a known thing. Tomboy will make you the best wife, without question, right? She can hunt, ride, and shoot, and she's a true lady. I mean, it doesn't get better than that, right? That's what every Texas man dreams about, right? So,
and that's so important for people to understand.
We don't think about it that way. Puberty is the cure.
Right. Those hormones that kick in during puberty, they help alleviate those feelings. That's actually, so by blocking puberty, you're actually preventing these kids from
That's why they
progressing.
Give them puberty blockers.
Yeah, and it's
the very purpose of the puberty blocker is to prevent them from developing an identity with their natural biological sex.
Right.
It's precisely that.
Even the American Psychological Association admits that the vast majority of these kids, anywhere from 70 to 96% of these kids, will have their gender dysphoria, their trans identity will resolve if they're allowed to progress through puberty.
That's right.
So the puberty blockers actually are, I can't even think of a good analogy. They're preventing someone from getting healthy.
They are. They're causing an illness. They're basically causing an illness. It's, how you get physical changes when you get old? It would be like giving someone a drug that prevents the body from adapting to getting old and it kills them. It's exactly the same kind of concept.
Right, because these puberty blockers, even though people say they're innocuous and that a child can just stop taking them, they're outrageously damaging.
They are.
They've been used for endometriosis and prostate cancer, and they're considered chemotherapy by many doctors. The side effects are outrageous.
They are.
And John Whitehall in Australia now just recently has done some research on the limbic system. These kids, it's like the Peter Pan drug. You're giving them a drug to keep them a child and keep their thinking childlike. So not only are they not physically developing, their thinking, their cognitive development is delayed. So you're actually causing these children to become developmentally delayed, and that to me is outrageous.
It's straight up child abuse. But I'd like to return to what we're talking about the courts. So the psychologists then almost become bound, or many feel bound, to adopt this affirming protocol for gender dysphoria once it was reclassified. So now you have custody evaluators. They're appointed in every divorce in America. And they start applying this standard. And they're testifying in court, and cases are adjudicated based on their testimony. Effectively, the American Psychological Association changed US laws by creating judge-made law, precedent laws, that bind and govern how future courts will deal with transgender cases. So we have to come to grips with this idea if we're going to fight these transgender leftists, these transgender child abusers. They have focused their time and energy on capturing professional bodies. And they are going to use those professional bodies to tyrannize us in the courts. So far, they've been pretty successful at it. We really need wealthy Republican, or conservative, or even leftists who are anti-trans, anti-child trans, anti-transgender child.
Pro-child.
Yeah. We need those people to go after these professional bodies and start influencing them.
Well, and it's so interesting that you say that, because I'm not sure if you know what happened in Utah. I got involved in this because Equality Utah, which is the Utah LGBT powerful organization, I used to donate to them because I was a liberal. And I got a letter in the mail, and it talked about this conversion therapy bill that they were going to pass. And as I read through it, I realized that they were trying to ban the very therapy that helped me resolve my trans identity. And it shocked me. And I thought, I must have this wrong. So I did some research. I actually went down to an event to talk to the director there at a public library. He had me removed by security. He wouldn't even talk to me about it.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I went and testified at the legislature. They ended up killing the legislation. And what the governor then did is went to our licensing board. So it's called DOPL, the Division of Professional Licensing. And they pushed through a new licensing regulation that prevented conversion therapy. So now in Utah, therapists can't help a child alleviate behavior, thoughts, or feelings related to a transgender identity. And they did it by going the back alley, just like what you're talking about. Instead of legislating it, they went through this professional body. So it's this concept of overriding the will of the people and the legislative process, which is really scary. I hadn't really thought of it as applied to family court, but now I can see how that's happening.
Yeah, because when they testify, they win cases, it creates precedent. And the cases are adjudicated based on past cases. So it's really, really terrible. And they're really good at this kind of stuff. Capturing organizations, leftist entryism was a strategy that was talked about by Trotsky. That was a strategy they've long worked out for 100 years, and they're experts, absolute experts at it. And though unfortunately, the conservatives are in complete denial about this. They keep asking, I always ask people about gay marriage. Gay marriage was voted on in 48 states, and it was voted down in all 48 states. It was voted down twice in California by a plurality of gay people. We still got gay marriage. It was imposed upon us. And the way they did it is they went into family courts, and they got one ruling in one district and another ruling in another district by carefully picking the cases, and then they took that up to the Supreme Court. And they're using these family courts to make law.
Yeah, they shape public opinion too by the way they report things, because one of the things that I've noticed with trans issues is you're not going to be portrayed in the media as a dad who dearly loves his son. You're going to be portrayed as a transphobic father.
Oh, absolutely.
And to me, that the way the media portrays these things is just it's unbelievable. So you talk about needing big donors, but even with big donors, I'm not even sure how to go about confronting the fact that, when I wrote to the division, local American Psychiatric Association person here in Utah, she wrote me back, and she said that being transgender is a normal developmental path. And the fact that we have got professionals, these are intelligent people, educated people who are accepting the idea that giving these harmful and dangerous drugs to children is normal and an acceptable path. I don't even I don't even know how to like start on
I
something
mean,
like
we're talking about cutting healthy body parts off.
right. Yeah, as
You
young
know,
as 13 years old, having these and in
yeah,
any other case where there's a mental health issue, if you as a parent were affirming that, if you had an anorexic daughter and you
oh
were
yeah,
saying that she was fat, you would lose you probably would have to have supervised
you're right.
visitations with her. I
You're
mean,
absolutely right.
and yet in this case, you're the bad guy.
You're right. And you're right to bring this up because it shows the immense social power of the left, which again I believe conservatives are just in total denial about. You know, I often do this thinking exercise when I give talks. You know, I ask the audience to consider the worst totalitarian regime that they can possibly imagine. I'm talking like, you know, North Korea under Kim Jong Il, before Kim Jong Un, like much worse than Kim Jong Un. I mean, so you know, the Stalinist Russia, maybe the worst parts of Stalinist Russia, right, in the Gulag somewhere or something. You might be able to get an educated person, a normal person, to look at a boy and say, well, yeah, that's a girl. You might be able to get them to say it. You might even be able to get them to say it with real conviction, okay? But I very much doubt you could actually get them to believe it. But consider what's happened in the United States. Close to 40% of the country will look at a boy and they will actually believe that it's a girl.
Do you really think that they actually believe it, or do you think that they're so like shamed into believing this that you're not allowed to question this because then you're intolerant and unloving and hateful and possibly even a Nazi? Do you think they really believe it?
I have met true believers, man, big time.
Really?
And they really think that, you know, that this is a boy with a girl's brain. And they really believe it. And they believe it with a messianic fervor.
It is.
Uh,
It is like a religious ideology now, and
that's
you're not
why I
allowed to
think
question it.
arguing and using rational arguments is not a good strategy for conservatives anymore,
No,
because
I
it is
actually
religious.
I was so surprised. I am fairly new to this, and I guess it was probably about a year ago when the conversion therapy ban was in the news, and I started to explain to someone about biology, and they said, "Oh, you're talking about biology? You are a paternalist. You know, you're falling into that patriarchy, that science." And
No,
I was shocked. Like these
no,
people want to throw out science because it's
yes,
patriarchal. And
yeah.
I don't even know how to interact with someone who is willing to just basically throw out reality. And then why is it they get to define reality? Why can't I define reality? If reality is up for definition, why do they get to define it?
That's a great point. The courtesies that they give themselves are never really given to us, right? They're never given to us. But
Where
yeah,
are
it's a
you in the
good point.
process with your boys?
What's that?
Where are you with your boys? Where are you? You
So the
coming
court gave me
back?
50-50, and immediately they did all kinds of procedural things. They got the judge recused. They got a new judge. We went through another like $100,000 worth of litigation just in the post-trial motions. So what happened was the order specified that I should get pure 50-50 custody, no child support, either in January or June, depending on what the counselor recommended. Those are the objectives or the goals. They delayed all this with these post-trial motions and everything. And then my new judge ordered me into a $5,000 a month counseling regime in order to determine when and if I should get 50-50 custody,
You
right?
have to go to counseling.
I have to go to counseling, and my sons have to submit to intensive psychotherapy with a therapist that I don't get to choose and don't know.
Wow. That's really scary.
It is scary. And um, the counselor then recommended that a second counselor be appointed for my two sons. So when you work this all out, it comes out to about $7,000 a month. And it works out in just travel time and being at appointments. The schedules that they're talking about work out to about 25 hours a week.
That's like part-time job.
because of travel times. Yeah.
Wow,
And
right.
places are like over an hour away from
And
me.
you're not actually going to benefit from any of this. So you
No.
have to do this? This is
Yes,
court
the
ordered?
court has ordered me to do it. And if I don't do it, then they can restrict my possession time and find me in contempt of court and jail me.
So they're using these kids as pawns. I
They
mean,
are. What the court is doing is medical child abuse. The judge is selecting mental health providers that will give her the diagnosis that she wants.
well, it's psychiatric abuse too. I mean,
Yes.
the fact that these
you think
kids even
about
have to go see a
Munchausen's.
therapist.
When you think about Munchausen's by proxy, the key distinguishing mark is that they go diagnosis shopping. They find providers that will give them the diagnoses that they want. That's exactly what the family court is doing to me. The counselor, my sons already have a counselor. Me and my ex have been taking him twice a month to this counselor. But they won't let me use that counselor. It has to be a counselor that the court selects, because that counselor will give them the answer that they want. So the court is literally acting as though the system itself is acting as a medical child abuser and is trying to use the licensed care providers to oppress my relationship with my son. That's where I am right now.
And I can't imagine
today
when
we
you're
filed
going
a
to
writ
that
of
therapy.
mandamus.
Go ahead.
Yeah, today we filed a writ of mandamus because the judge wrote these orders up as temporary orders, and in Texas, those are not appealable. There's really no legal recourse to them. So we filed a writ of mandamus because they effectively got a modification request without following the due process for a modification request. As you can see, the courts don't follow the law. So I wasn't served with a new case. None of the stuff that's supposed to be done in a modification case was done. So we filed that. We hope that the higher court will instruct the lower court to issue new temporary orders. And at that time, we want to be able to argue that, well, my son already has a counselor, and that the counseling that the court wants me to go through, I have already completed with another counselor anyway. But the court won't take that.
And they want you to go to counseling because you don't believe that your boy is a girl.
That's correct.
And they're legally mandating that, or else you go to jail and lose interaction with your son.
That's correct.
Like, this just sounds like, this does not sound like America. I mean,
listen, I mean, the custody evaluator in my second trial recommends in his report that my son be transitioned to a girl. You know, the court ignored him because
even though he only presents at your wife's house. I mean, that's the thing, is that
correct.
Sorry, I know what it's like to be transgender, and you don't turn it off and on again.
No.
It's something that, like, and even they say it's like so deep and so important. And so it's not something that you sort of like have one place and don't have another.
Correct.
Unless you know that you will not be loved unless you accept that identity that's being imposed upon you.
That's what's happening to my son. He wants his mother to love him.
Of
But
course.
I'll tell you how bad it is. Last night, you know, my sons get FaceTime with their mom when they're with me. I had my sons over the weekend. So they're on FaceTime with their mother. And she calls him James.
Oh my God.
She calls him James. The courts are literally privileging this little splinter of doubt that she's put in there with this, way above his normal gender identity.
This is just, I can't, like, if we were talking about, like, who's hurting the kids the most in this situation, it's the courts. I mean,
yes, it is. It is.
And I can't imagine how you can even just not, I would be so angry. Jeff, I would be so angry. I mean,
well, I am angry, but I do know that I beat the opposition by remaining calm, and I'm all about winning. So you know, when I get upset, I just go pray. I do prostrations and pray, prostrations and pray.
And I think that's a really good way of handling it, because we know anger, first of all, when we're angry, we don't think clearly. And second of all, you do need to stay calm in this situation.
Have to.
It's just critical.
Any instance of anger is going to be interpreted as violence. You have to be very careful.
And it's really, to me, as a kid, I grew up with parents who were divorced, and my mother actively said things about my dad that, you know, he didn't love me, he didn't want me. And I just want you to know that your calm and gentle loving of them is going to be so important for them in the
Thank you.
long run, that it will pay off, and that even though this has got to be just so painful, that your boys know you love them, and that's going to be really
And
important.
they do know that. I mean,
Yeah.
they do know that. You know, James crawls into my bed every night when he's here. He sleeps with me. I mean, we snuggle, we love each other, and we talk about it all the time. You know, I got 5 texts from him today saying, "I love you, Dad." So
Aw.
it's we have a close relationship. My boys, you know, they're very different boys, but we're all very, very close and very loyal to one another.
So when you have them now, do you talk about this much? Does it come up? Do they know that you're in the process of litigation?
Yeah, they know something's going on because they know we go to court. You know, maybe I'm just real simple. I mean, you know, I'm just kind of a self-educated farm boy, honestly. But you know, I'm real simple about this. I just tell my sons, number one, tell the truth. And I always tell James, look, it's not right that a boy your age has to tell uncomfortable truths to adults. But you know, at some point, you're just going to have to learn that you just have to tell the truth. Take your time with it. No rush. When you're comfortable, you feel safe. You tell your mom the truth. You tell the school the truth. You tell the psychologist the truth. Just tell everybody the truth. That's all you should do. And I also tell him that, you know, it's his life. And, you know, he's a little boy, but he has a right to ask for things. He has a right to make his desires known, even if they're not given to him by adults. And he should do that. He should make clear what he wants. And I also just don't, you know, when he comes on, his mom dresses him like a drag queen at her house. So when he comes onto Facebook and he's dressed up with makeup and everything, you know, I just let it roll off my back. And he's still my son. And I think in the long run, what he'll find as he gets into puberty is that it's just really good being a boy, that it matches him. It's going to feel good. And I will have modeled that for him, and it will just be there for him, you know.
Well, and
I know
that's
his
one of the
brother-
benefits of dragging this out, is the longer you can drag this out, the longer you can keep him off puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, the
Yes.
better off he's going to be.
Yep.
And
That's
so,
that's the red line for me. You know, that's the
Yeah.
red line. Because
yeah,
they virtually 100% just never come back after the date.
right. Which makes sense, because you're preventing them from thinking clearly, and you've also got doctors now telling them that they're born in the wrong body, and so the
Well, it was
fact that
originally James's pediatrician that diagnosed him.
yeah, and
It's
I just
Dr.
can't-
Jennifer Pape in
yeah.
Farmington.
Well, and one of the reports that I saw about your case, the reporters were actually interviewing friends of your wife's who have a transgender child,
Mhm.
and I was just shocked, because it just so clearly looks to me like Munchausen,
Yes.
like almost
Yeah.
socially, social, in order to get the social cred.
Yes.
It's like sort of Munchausen along with like wanting to be
What it
the
looks
cool
like to me
kid.
too. I
Yeah.
I'm not a psychologist. I can't say that's what it is, but it looks like that to me.
Yeah, I mean, it just is so strange. And this couple that they were talking to, who I guess your son goes over and plays with their child occasionally. I think I'm trying to remember the name. It was
Yes.
Libby. I'm not sure if,
That's
but
right.
it was, and the reporter was so sympathetic and obviously totally buying into this idea that
Yes.
your poor son is not being allowed to be his authentic self.
Right.
and they even interviewed this child who is being transitioned by his parents.
Mhm.
And it just the absurdity of it. And it's like the emperor's new clothes. At some point we need to have more and more people say, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. How are we saying this
Well,
with a straight face? How are we allowing this to happen to children? How are we saying that the parents who are doing this to the children are the ones that we should be celebrating, when in fact you're the hero of the story, Jeff?
well, I mean, they privilege the abnormal gender expression. I don't know how else to put it. And in terms of stopping this, you mentioned stopping it. I think what happened in Idaho is an excellent example of why it's going to be hard to stop. The Republican Senate voted down a bill that was put forward by their Republican House to outlaw sex change surgeries on kids. Now, that's totally uncontroversial. Like 99% of America thinks you should not, even people who are pro-trans often, right? Like this is just like off the charts. There's very little disagreement about this. Why would Republicans in Idaho vote it down? Here's why. The left is very clever. They build these $300 million gender clinics, and they get state banks on the hook for loans to the gender clinics. So these state banks, are holding $100 million in loan notes, and they lobby the Republican legislature through the Chamber of Commerce and so forth. That's why the Chamber of Commerce is so pro-child trans. And each one of these kids is about a $4 to $5 million pipeline of money to these clinics because they're lifetime patients afterwards. And so they get the banks on the hook, they get businesses on the hook, and the businesses are perfectly happy, I guess, to lobby against kids, and Republicans are happy to follow along. And this is where I say again, if we're gonna fight this, we have to get serious about what in the Marine Corps we call the center of gravity, the sources of strength that our opponents can bring to the table. They have gotten lots of interest groups, strongly in favor of maintaining these gender clinics. You're going to have to undermine that.
Do you have any ideas on how to do that?
Well, first of all, I think that, we have to, get people who are on the boards of these banks to know what this loan money is going for. And I know here in Texas, some of the largest donors here in Texas have pulled all their money from Children's Hospital in Dallas, precisely because they do sex change surgeries on kids.
Well, and that's the rub that just, it gets to me every time is, I went to Alabama to testify because they were trying to change the law there so that children couldn't be medically transitioned. Like you said, couldn't be medically abused with puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and getting body parts chopped off. And I hear people say, well, that doesn't happen. And they deny that it happens. They say, oh, no, that doesn't
Nobody believes it.
Nobody believes it. Even people who are in, the LGBT community, a lot of them, they do not believe it. And they're adamant.
Well, that's a big truth too.
It's shocking to me that they think that we would make this up. I mean, and the other thing is if it's not happening, then it would be fine to legislate against it because it's not happening. But it is happening, and they don't want it. And so when I was there was a little girl who was testifying, and she said, she's transgender, so she's presenting as a male. And she said she would have killed herself if she hadn't been allowed to transition, and that she had been suicidal from like the age of 3 years old. And the only thing that cured her was this medical transition. And of course, her parents are like behind her, rah, rah, rah. She's so brave, she's so wonderful. And I'm just thinking, this is more dystopian than I ever could have imagined, that this little girl is being affirmed. And we talked about before I started recording how powerful affirmation is, that if you get a child who's not very social, who may be struggling a little bit, and you start affirming them, that child's going to feel better for sure.
Yes.
And then if you start giving them a lot of attention and telling them how brave they are, they're going to feel even better. And so it's not surprising that some of these kids are saying, yes, it's been so wonderful to me. But if we had done the same thing with these kids, only given them support through affirming who they really are and giving them support in that way, they'd feel good too.
Yeah. I mean, so in my second trial, where I defended against the idea that I should lose all my parental rights, we brought in Dr. Levine, who was a colleague of Paul McHugh. And Paul McHugh ran a gender clinic at Johns Hopkins back in the 70s where they did a affirming protocol. And after 4 years, they shut the clinic down because it was harming patients. This is completely well understood. There's no reason for any psychologist to not understand this. That's completely well understood. The other thing that Dr. Levine talked about. And Dr. Levine's in favor of sex change surgeries in some cases. He's on the left, he's not on the right, but he's a man of science and he's a man of integrity. And if a man of integrity, you can deal with them, whether they're left or right. So he was one of my expert witnesses. And he explained how affirming is dangerous. And the way he explained it to the jury, I thought was very good. He said that the psychological outcomes, the social outcomes, the medical outcomes are all best if a child comes to identify with their biological sex. That the aim of all treatment should be to go towards the best outcome. It should not be to preserve a lesser outcome. And so that's why he said that he could not recommend affirming except in extreme cases of actual mental illness, right? So affirming is definitely dangerous. And there's plenty of evidence now. They know that it prolongs gender dysphoria and it can make it extend past puberty, even without puberty blockers. It is dangerous. Nobody should affirm. The other thing is they brought in Johanna Olsen Kennedy as an expert witness. From
Really?
California.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Yeah, she's a piece of work.
Yes, and we
The one who
deposed her.
says if you get your breasts cut off, it's okay because if you decide you want them at a later date, you can just go get them.
You're right. You're right. Well, we deposed her. We did a 2.5-hour deposition.
Wow.
And we asked her that question. How can you, first of all, we asked her, how many girls have you recommended for full mastectomy? And she said, well, what's a girl? So we said, well, okay, girls under 15. She said, 200, 250? Okay. So then my lawyer asked her, how can you justify the removal of healthy tissue? And she said, if it's causing psychological distress, it isn't healthy tissue.
Wow.
Which is amazing because there's body dysmorphia. Is when
Right.
people say, well, my leg is causing me psychological distress, let's cut it off.
Or my fat.
Yes. But suddenly when it's transgender, it's okay.
Wow.
So she admitted to that. She would not tell us how many boys she had recommended for castration.
Wow.
And after that deposition, she did not testify. They didn't put her on the stand. But so when people tell you that it's not happening, you can just send them to Johanna Olsen Kennedy.
Oh yeah, and she's got an NSF grant. So some of this is it's documented because somehow she got IRB approval to study this, and the way she did it is she sort of did one of these workarounds. So she's not actually the way she's doing it is she's looking at collected data that would be collected anyway. And so,
Right.
But this is how we know that she is chopping off the breasts of 13-year-olds.
Yes.
She's giving cross-sex hormones, not puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones to kids as young as 8 years old.
It is absolutely
8 years
correct,
old.
which permanently
And
sterilizes.
This is documented. This is because it has to be reported because it's a federal study.
Yep.
So, and this is what she's reporting. So who knows what she's doing?
Oh, I know.
That she's not reporting.
We've brought this up many times. Like, there are very strict laws when you're doing experimental procedures on children. None of those laws are being followed.
No.
And
Well,
the
they do
federal
this
government-
workaround by saying we're looking at data that's already been collected.
Right. The federal government and the states are not enforcing those laws. And, that's something else that conservatives need to start looking into. And a lot of it comes with the agencies. One of the things is, electing, new representatives only does so much because actually we're ruled by agencies and courts. So in Texas, I've undergone 7 CPS investigations. And in every case, when they talked to my son, they affirmed him as a girl. They abused
They
my
called
son.
him Luna,
They did.
and they
They
used
abused him.
really.
Yes, they did, without my consent. And in court, they said, well, we asked them, is there a policy for you to do that? Why did you do that? And every one of them said the same thing. Well, no, it's just something that I do. And the agencies cleared my
Because
ex-wife
kids are
of
so
any
they want
wrongdoing.
to please, and so if you have this expert person coming in and calling you Luna and using female pronouns, and you're a child and want to please them,
I know. And you know, a young child just
That
doesn't have
doesn't
the
make
ability to
any
resist them.
sense.
Yeah. I caught one of the teachers at his school giving him a dress because I would take him to school as a boy and the teacher would give him a dress.
Wow.
Yep.
So currently, does he go to school as James or as Luna?
He's last year he was registered as Luna, but I'm not going to consent to that this year. That's going to lead to another court battle. The school district in Coppell, Texas. There's a guy named, his last name is Hunt. He's the superintendent. Is a left-wing whack job. The principal at my son's school is a left-wing whack job. And they're all about affirming James and abusing my son. And the Coppell School District is absolutely complicit in child abuse, without question.
Can you file? I mean, it seems to me like in any other situation, if you had teachers who were doing this or a parent who was doing this, I mean, that you could call Child Protective Services on them for mental abuse. I mean, I can't imagine in any other situation.
One thing I did do after the teacher gave my son a dress is I said, look, you have to respect under Title IX, you have to respect my child's gender expression. You have created a hostile environment for his male gender expression.
Right.
And
Definitely.
you're privileging his female gender expression, and you can't do that. So they brought in their school psychologist to clear them of any wrongdoing. And they had them talk to my son without my permission or my knowledge.
So
the Coppell School District is just utterly corrupt and is
it just sounds horrible.
Filled with child abusers. They've had 2 teachers, in the last few years who have raped students.
Oh.
Coppell School District is just a cesspool, and it's because the superintendent is a complete, horrible, nasty person.
Well, when you have this ideology that encourages sexualization of children at a young age, it is going to accept really inappropriate interactions between children and their teachers. And I'm just thinking of, in any other case, if teachers were to start talking about a child's genitalia or their gender expression, especially if there was a girl and they were trying to get her to not be, I mean, in any case, like they're basically trying to get your child to be non-gender conforming.
Correct.
They're affirming
and
that.
Everything they can to help my ex-wife.
And to me, that does feel like sexual harassment. I mean,
it is sexual harassment, and I consider it child abuse. I consider it sexual abuse. It doesn't meet the statutory definition of it, but I think tampering with a child's sexual identity is sex abuse of a child.
Well, and for adults to even, for them to be.
And that's the teachers that teach my kid, 7 hours a day. This is what I have to go through.
And these are teachers that we want our children to trust, and yet, the more I get into this, the more I'm feeling like, we have to debrief our kids when they come home from school, because who knows what they've been told by their teachers.
Well, we have a lady here in Texas. Her name is Alice Linehan, and she's done a lot of research on this stuff, and she's very active in the Texas curricula development here. And there was a big shift about 10 years ago away from teaching content-based knowledge, what they called content-based knowledge.
Because that's probably patriarchal.
Right, reading, writing, arithmetic. And you also can't get equal results from all students, so they can't.
Right.
So they switched over to something they call SEL in Texas, social and emotional learning. And instead of teaching them knowledge, they are trying to frame the attitudes and beliefs of students. And that's what they have redefined education as. So this transgender thing is really all about redefining ideas and attitudes and beliefs of students. It's not about giving them intellectual content.
Of course, obviously, yeah. And so I just can't imagine. I would feel so nervous about sending my kid into that environment every day.
I know,
but there's really not much you can do about it.
I have little choice. I mean, it's going to be a giant court battle about where my sons go to school. So
are James and Jude in the same class?
They are in the same grade, but not in the same class. They separate them because they're brothers.
See, does anybody ever give Jude a dress?
No.
So,
No,
I mean, that right there shows that they're
you're
they're
right.
treating them differently,
You're
which
right.
you're not allowed to do.
No, and it violates the dress code of the school. The school's very clear about it. You know, boys can't wear tank tops. Girls can't wear halter tops. These kinds of things. Um, my son comes to school violating the dress code because he's a boy and he's not dressed appropriately. But the scummy school district in Capel and Brad Hunt, their superintendent, just lets it happen.
So coming up this year, you have a court case about where they're going to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
You have the therapy that you've been going through, paying thousands of dollars.
We're gonna have to do. We're gonna fight a modification request on that.
So as I'm listening to this, and how can people who are watching this, who are hopefully as incensed as I am about this, help you to fight this battle?
For me, it's all about just legal fees. She's spending. I mean, the retainer for her law firm was $175,000. You know, I mean, she spent enormous amounts of money, and she's going to continue to spend them. So for me, it's just about paying for my lawyer. My lawyer is awesome. He's a Texas country lawyer, doesn't soak me with fees. He's admitted to mistakes. He's very honest, and I'll never change lawyers. He's so honest with me. And he's been real good about, you know, correcting me on a lot of stuff. I really trust him. He's a good Christian. He's a good father for his own son, and he's taken a real interest in my sons personally. The best way to do it is to either go to the Save James Facebook page, and there's a link there where you can go to a donation link, or you can just go to savejames.com, and there's a donate link right at the top. It's just savejames.com.
I'll list both of those in the description of this, because I think I had a very minor legal case with my employer, and ended up I'm now self-representing because it is so expensive. I mean, it's just
it's unbelievable.
It's unbelievably expensive.
Yeah.
And in this case, you're fighting for the life of your son,
Yes.
and you're also fighting for other children, because if precedent gets set in the case of James, then all these other families are in so much trouble.
They are, precisely because James does not present always as a girl. So what it will set a precedent for is if a child ever presents as the opposite sex, boom, that's it for your kid. Done. That's what they're setting this up to be.
Yeah, and it's bad enough that it could happen with a child who is 100% always presenting. But
Right.
in this case, when it's so clear that James is doing this to get his mother's love and affirmation, when that is so obvious,
Yep.
if they actually approve of this. And so does the court have the authority to allow him to go and undergo medical transitioning? Do they have the authority to say, sorry, Jeff, we're going to go ahead and let him start puberty blockers?
The court can absolutely do that if they determine it's in his best interest, whether I want it or not, because the courts do not follow the Constitution or the constitutional restrictions. They
I
don't.
just feel like,
And that's
part
at
of
the point at which I'll have to take it to the Texas Supreme Court and then into federal court maybe.
right, and it seems like that is going
And that's
to
$1 million.
happen. Yeah, and so you do need the support. So I'm going to encourage people to donate to your fund so that you can continue this battle, because it's so important.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I am just
my lawyer. I need to keep my trust balance with my lawyer filled up.
yeah, and just being there for James. Is he doing okay with this? And Jude, are they?
He does. You know,
handling it?
the longer he's away from me, the worse he does, as you would imagine. The longer he's with me, the better he does. After he's been with me for about a week, it just all goes away.
Wow.
He has no issues. He's not uncomfortable. Nothing at all.
And it's
And
just
even his mother will call him James.
I can't imagine why you don't have custody. I mean, I
There's a number
cannot
of
figure
reasons.
this out.
The leftist proclivity to privilege this abnormal gender identity. There is a natural bias towards mothers for young children.
But it's this in this particular case,
It's
the
pretty
stakes are
obvious, I
so
agree.
high,
I
and
agree.
so
And it's pretty obvious.
yeah, it's pretty obvious. And I believe that even your state representatives have come to your support and said, hey, this is not okay?
Well, I had a similar experience you talked about. My state representative did not believe me. Basically, was, let me put it in very strongest terms. I mean, he did not believe me. And so I said, look, all I'm asking you to do is come to one hearing. He came, stayed 30 minutes. His mind was blown. He left and started calling every representative in Texas.
So we need to get your story out there. When is your next court case?
So we just filed our mandamus brief. That will take a while to come back. Once that happens, they'll probably file another motion to modify, and that'll be next. It'll probably be this summer. My guess is she'll try to schedule it during my vacation time with my boys in July. She usually tries to schedule court cases in my time in July.
Wow. So as we're finishing up here, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
I just would like to ask everyone to try to look at the world as it really is, and to look at how the left has won, and to think about the fact that we really have not defeated the left in any major social battle since 1960s. I mean,
and you're looking at two previous far left folk here.
Yeah.
Jeff and I both used to be, I was a bleeding heart liberal. You were even further left than me.
Philosophical Marxist.
Right. And so we both sort of we were there, and sort of, I feel like, at least for me, my eyes were open, and now I'm going, oh my gosh, how did we get here?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's nothing new. I mean, it's just that we haven't been clear-eyed about seeing it, right? We have not won a single social battle since the 1960s. That's 80 years.
That is a long time.
We haven't won a single battle with the left in 80 years. We're doing something wrong. And we need to start holding our leaders accountable for results. If they're not beating the left back, they need to go. They can't tell us about conservative principles. They can't tell us about religious theology. They have to use those things to win. You get your principles when you win.
And the stakes are high. The stakes are so high.
They're high. The ultimate for your kids.
Yes. Yeah, that really is. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your story. And I'm just
Aaron, I've talked to you so much on Facebook, and I love to read your posts on Facebook. I share almost everything you do. But it was really a joy to meet you in person. And
I hope we get a chance to meet actually in person at some point, because I feel like this is such an important battle, and we need to do everything we can to stand up for these kids.
So mommy told you you were a girl?
Uh-huh.